You point to how things have changed since the Cold War gave Americans a common enemy. The obvious thing that jumps to mind is social media exacerbating things. But if you take the sort of post-Cold War period, how do you understand the history of this? How is it that America have evolved to this place that you've just described?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people have pinpointed social media as a possible explanation. And I've heard some interesting competing views on this. So on the one hand, I think for a while people thought that the echo chamber problem was the real issue, that you're only seeing your own opinions reflected back at you, your views harden, you're not exposed to viewpoints from the other side. And that this may be sort of fueling the polarization. But on the other hand, I've also seen some interesting research suggesting that maybe the opposite is true, that before social media, you would spend most of your time with people like yourself. So the echo chambers always existed, even before social media. Most of your friends, your family, the social circles you hang out with, they have the same political views as you. Social media actually introduced you to the other side, and often what it does is introduce you to the most extreme elements of the other side, because the people who post on social media, they tend to be more politically engaged, they tend to be more hardened in their views, and this is a classic finding for Twitter users. Something like 2% of Twitter users post 80% of the tweets. And this is kind of a classic heuristic in social media, the 1% rule of social media, which is that 1% of the population posts the majority of the content online. 9% will engage with it in some way. They'll comment, they'll like, they'll retweet. And the remaining 90% are just lurkers, where they don't really post anything at all. So you actually you're not exposed to the majority of the views on your side or the other on social media. You're exposed to a small percentage of the population that is very politically active, that's often very angry. They tend to score high on what are known as the dark triad personality traits. And that's what we're exposed to. And we think that that is the typical person on the other side, right? So if you open social media and you see people cheering the death of Charlie Kirk or something on the political left, and you think, oh, that's what the left is. Well, no, that's 1% or 2% of the left that are posting those things. And then maybe 9% that are liking and retweeting those things. But the majority of people are not on social media and they're not engaging with it at all.
Yes, that distribution is the classic Pareto distribution.
Exactly.
Can you unpack for me the dark triad? I've also heard dark tetrad. What does that mean exactly?
So the dark triad, it's a framework in personality psychology, and it encompasses 3 distinct personality traits. So you have narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And so narcissism, a lot of your listeners will be familiar with narcissism, this kind of a self-entitled view of the world, being self-important, grandiose, and then psychopathy, which is cruelty or callousness, disregard for other people. And finally, Machiavellianism, which is strategic exploitation and duplicity, this feeling that the ends justify the means, that manipulation is okay if it allows you to get what you want. And then the dark tetrad. So this is a proposed 4th additional trait, although there's still some debate among personality psychologists about this. But the 4th trait, dark tetrad, that trait is sadism, which is positive delight in the suffering of others. Which is distinct from psychopathy. So psychopathy is, I don't care what happens to you. If I have to mow you down to get what I want, fine. If not, that's fine too. Sadism is mowing you down is the point. That's how I receive gratification. And so, there's something like 1 to 5% of the population, depending on the measures you use, have elevated traits, elevated dark triad traits, and they disproportionately account for so much of the misconduct and bad behavior that we see in the real world in terms of violence, actual physical violence and crimes and so on, but then also in sort of more everyday transgressions, manipulation and betrayal and subversiveness and that kind of thing. And then online, there's been some interesting work comparing Twitter users to Facebook users. You have to have a kind of a reference point, a control group, and so they used Facebook as like the normie social media user. and Twitter users score higher on the dark triad traits than Facebook users do.
Yeah. How accepted is the dark tetrad theory amongst scientists or
among personality psychologists?
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be a bit of debate with everything, but this is more or less an agreed upon framework among personality psychologists that if you compare the average person in society with someone who has elevated dark triad traits, you're going to notice distinct differences, and you're going to be able to predict how the person with those elevated traits will behave compared to the average person. And it's important here, I suppose, also to point out that the dark triad, these are what are known as subclinical traits. So if you score high in dark triad narcissism, that doesn't necessarily mean you would qualify for a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. These measures are meant to understand the average member of society, the average population. So it's a distribution, it's a bell curve where most of us, if we take the dark triad scales, will fall somewhere in the middle. But if someone scores in that sort of far right tail of the bell curve, that is someone who maybe you would want to avoid.
Why does X reward those people with those traits?
Well, negativity is naturally attention drawing. So if I tweet something that's neutral or positive, it doesn't seem to capture people's attention in the same way as if I were to post something that is provocative or shocking or negative or insulting in some way. And that's just how our brains are wired, is that we pay much more attention to negative information than positive information, because negative information could potentially be threatening. It could lead to loss of life or injury and so on, whereas positive information, well, it's nice to have, but it's not life-threatening in that same way. And so we pay attention to the negative. And then when if you're a dark triad-oriented person, and you already kind of have a cynical, negative outlook, and you post those things, the algorithm will reward you. So I know a lot of people want to blame the algorithm, but the algorithm kind of just reflects human psychology. If positivity spread, if we were naturally drawn to positive messages, then the algorithm would sense that and start to feed us more positive stuff. But we already are drawn to the negative, and then the algorithm, which I guess there's some responsibility for it, it reinforces it and and shows us more of that kind of content.
We've evolved to have to pay attention to the negative, even if it's a false negative, for evolutionary purposes, for survival.
Yes. Yeah. And it exploits that in the same way that, I don't know, fast food will exploit your desire for, junk food, right? It'll show the images, and there's a distinctive smell, and, they know how to exploit those features of our psychology. And social media does kind of the same thing with keeping the messages short, right? There's the character limit. I mean, I know Twitter, you can expand it, but the shorter messages tend to get more attention. And the fact that you have to click see more means that you're incentivized to keep your message short and sweet and stripped of all nuance. And that is what tends to go viral.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.